Welcome, Amit, to this CityQ Smartcast. We've been, looking forward to pick your brains on a bunch of topics for a long time now. So, looking forward to the next hour and a half.
Thanks, Harish. Pleasure to be on CTQ.
Yeah. Thanks, Amit. So, the first time we actually interacted on LinkedIn was about reading. So, let's dive in straight into the topic of books. Tell us about your reading routine and how do you pick the books that you read?
Yeah, so I love to read, of course, and that's how we got connected, I guess, through LinkedIn. And I read a lot. I got originally inspired by one of my first managers in the US and California who used to read like a book a day. That's about 300 a year, which was shocking because I could barely read like, four a year. Um, but obviously things have come a long way since. Now, of course, in terms of your specific question of how I pick books, pick books from recommendations, mostly from people that I know, from podcasts that I listen to, from articles that I read, from tweets that I see. So it's literally like a very broad funnel. And as we'll explore probably later in the podcast, I keep tending to buy a lot of books, and it's not even that I read everything I buy.
So, do you? We see a lot of books in your bookshelf. So, do you read on the Kindle or is it the physical books that you read? And what's your routine like? When do you read? Before sleeping through the day, how does it work?
Yeah, my majority of my reading is on the Kindle. That said, I do have a fairly large bookshelf in the back there, and I do occasionally buy books in physical form because there's a certain joy and delight that comes from reading books like that. In terms of the routine, literally I read every moment I get. So there isn't a schedule like at 7:30 a.m. I will read, and at 10:30 before night I will read. If I get a slot, I read. And it's not always books, obviously. We're all reading for our jobs and various things. So I tend to read quite regularly. I don't have a quantification, but it wouldn't be a surprise to me if I was reading like 1.5 to maybe 2.5 hours a day,
Right.
which is outside of the kind of day-to-day, not counting email and all that kind of stuff.
And since you read so much, what about personal knowledge management? So do you take notes? How do you take them? Electronic, pen and paper? How does that work for you?
Yeah, that's something, to be honest, Harish, I've not really cracked yet, despite the fact of reading so much. So a couple of things I do. Of course, on the Kindle, it's much easier. So I highlight a lot of things and take notes on the Kindle, right? So then I think it's read.amazon.com or read.kindle.amazon, something like that, right? So all your notes that you took as well as the highlights kind of show up there. And I will take those and often export it to Google Docs or to Evernote or something like that. I have on my to-do list to explore using note-taking tools like Roam Research and others, but I just haven't gotten around to it. One simple trick that I kind of picked up over the years is, in terms of trying to have recall or remembering things, is when you read something like, especially like a book, I will try and explain it to at least a few people. And now, actually, you don't even need human beings in a direct sense. You can put it on Twitter or LinkedIn. So I'll often try to write up some of my takeaways or highlights or quotable quotes, or in the rare cases, actually a full book review on LinkedIn or Twitter or somewhere else. So, but no, the actual note taking can be much better.
Right, right. And any favorite book reviews that you have done? Not books. I'm asking about reviews that you've done.
Um, no, I actually started a newsletter last year, just at the beginning
Right.
of COVID, called Mind Trails on LinkedIn, where I started kind of reviewing books. I wouldn't say there is any particular one that I like. In general, I mean, books are amazing, and if you're going to go write a review about a book, then you really liked it. So
Correct.
I would say they're all quite intriguing and interesting.
Right, right, right. You have a very popular post about the 7 timeless books that you would gift to every new manager. We'll link to that post from the show notes as well. But just talk me through that list. How did that collection of those books actually? What was the impact that it had on you, and how did you come to the conclusion that this is the list of books that I would love to give to every new manager?
Yes, I've both been a individual contributor and a manager and senior manager, what have you, right, for many decades. And often people will call me and ask me for book recommendations because I read a fair bit. And so I was just, once something got triggered again, perhaps through social media or whatever, I was just thinking about, oh, let me give this to this person, let me give this to that person, etc. And I just said, what about all the books that new managers should have? And then I literally, it was like an inventory of books that have had a big impact on me over the years. And I wish I had when I was starting out as a manager, say 20, 25 years ago. And that's how kind of that book came about. Just to give a couple of examples from that list for your audience, there were two that actually I saw in Harvard Business Review that were given to me by my manager at Google. One is How to Manage Yourself, right? And the other is How to Manage Your Manager, right? And I have since, I mean, those are actually articles, not even books. But yeah, I think there are books also, eponymously with those titles. But I have gifted that pretty much to anyone that has ever worked for me since then, and often to even people who newly become managers, saying, these are good ones. But there were many others in that list.
Right.
Happy to talk about some of those if that's of interest.
Right. Yeah. Please go ahead, because managers looking at up-leveling themselves is a prime category of audience for us. So we'd definitely like to talk more about that.
Sure. So one other classic book in that 7-book list is High Output Management by Andy Grove. I'm a big Andy Grove fan, and if you're into management, or for that matter, leadership skills, you would want to read Andy Grove. And he is also often cited as the original creator and founder, not just of Intel, but this whole category of performance management, right? And in fact, in the modern era, companies like Google and Facebook and others use this thing called OKRs, objectives and key results, right? As opposed to KPIs or KRAs, which is more popular perhaps here in India. And he is widely credited to be the kind of creator of that. And really, I think what High Output Management, I read it many years ago, like literally a couple of decades ago. What it inspired me to think about is, the leverage that you have as a manager is not the number of hours you work or, you put in. It's how much leverage can you get from the team? How effective can you make the team? How effective can you make your decision making, right? Are you spending the right time on the right kind of issues, right? So leverage is really was one of the key takeaways from that book for me. Leverage both with respect to your time, with your calendar, with your decision making, with the people, and how you're empowering the people or managing the people or holding them accountable. So phenomenal book that I would recommend. It's a little dated now, but I think it's one of those timeless ones, which is why I recommended it in the 7 books that I would gift every manager.
Right. Yeah. So, another thought that struck me while you were mentioning these, you mentioned these 2 HBR articles, which, then later became books. So what about these other sources of wisdom? You said you consume a lot of podcasts and articles. Is there any pattern in how you curate these different sources, and how have these sources changed over the years for you?
Yeah, so very, very interesting. So I think podcasts have become a very big source, right, of book recommendations, because you listen to a guest and you find something that they're saying that's compelling, and then they say, oh, I read this book here, or this ties up with that thing, and so on and so forth, right? So maybe listeners who are listening now might pick up a copy of High Output Management, or the OKR book by John Doerr, and so forth, right? So podcast is something that has become very, very interesting in terms of selecting books. But beyond that, there's this nice term, since we're talking, so this is a podcast about books, called Sudoku. I don't know if you've heard Sudoku, this, right? Yeah. So, and the meaning of that Japanese term, I'm sure I mispronounced it, is that, you keep acquiring books, even the ones that you may not end up reading, because every book literally contains years, if not decades, of wisdom, right? From from the author, right, or the creator of that book. So in terms of how I pick books, I already shared that earlier, that I'm looking at any and all sources. I've also reduced the bar or the pressure on myself, back to the Sudoku kind of metaphor. On every book I read, I must finish cover to cover from preface to afterward, right? I'm like, look, if it attracts me, if it grabs my attention, if it motivates me, I'll read it. Sometimes they don't, I drop it. Sometimes they do, but they're dense and intense and they need multiple readings. So I will read it and then I'll park it away. and then I kind of come back and read it again. So I think that, the bar for my time is very high, but at the same time, the bar to pick up a book has actually become a little bit more generous. I wouldn't say I'm picking low quality stuff, but I'm like, this definitely, if it's not been referred in some channel that I like or appreciate, then I won't pick it up.
Right. I think Taleb also has this concept of anti-library, right? Books that you haven't read. I think it's on similar lines. So another concept that's there is senti reading. A book that you would read probably 100 times. That's what the article says. So is there a book that you have actually read so many times, or you wish you read at least 100 times?
There are many actually. Maybe that's another listicle kind of article that I could write potentially. Clearly, Bhagavad Gita is one of those. Correct. I think Charlie Munger's Almanac is another one of those. Thinking Fast and Slow, Danny Kahneman is an evergreen. You can read it every year. I think When Breath Becomes Air, right? Paul Kalanther is another one which is about mortality and his last year while he was kind of living. I think there's at least a couple of dozen books I would put in that category, which can be read not only like many times, literally like at least once a year.
Right.
And Man's Search for Meaning is another book that is worth reading every year. And it kind of centers you, reminds you. Bhagavad Gita, I think I mentioned that earlier.
Yeah. And do you see any fundamental difference between how, say, entrepreneurs and corporate professionals should be reading for future relevance? Is there a difference in outlook? Should there be a difference in outlook?
I don't think so. I think you should read what grabs your curiosity, your attention. You should read that helps, whatever helps you perform better in whatever task you have at hand. I suspect if you're in the corporate world and more on the classic business or leadership or management path, either as a technologist or as a business person, obviously things which are more around organizational design and management and books like we talked about earlier, right? High output management, OKR, etc. They might have more bearing. Whereas startup entrepreneurs and so forth will be probably reading much more around risk and decision making and innovation and 0 to 1 and things of that nature, right? But pretty much I think the lines are blurred quite a lot, right? An entrepreneur could go suddenly become a large company IPO and suddenly they're running a big company, and vice versa. A big company executive could leave tomorrow and go to the proverbial 2 BHK Bangalore startup, right? And so I think you should read broadly and what grabs your interest.
Right. Yeah. So, we love our quizzing. So we're going to pepper this interview with some quiz questions. And I think this is the right time for this very appropriate, question. And to put some pressure on you, there's going to be something at stake. So every question that you get right, we'll actually give you a code that you can use to block a spot on one of our daily reader compounds. You can gift it to someone. Okay, so the first quiz question is this. In Iceland, Hola Boka Flu, I hope I've pronounced it right, is a Christmas Eve tradition. It translates to Yule-flood. This began during the Second World War, partly to support local businesses in a particular industry. So I want you to fill in the blanks, Yule-flood, and I'll give you a hint. It involves an exchange of something.
Okay. The poor kind of reader who would have got a free subscription is under more pressure than me because I'm totally drawing a blank here. I have no idea. But let me take a guess. Yule-flood, like FLOOD. Is that
Correct.
What it is? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let me say some kind of, let me put glacier or something like that in there.
Okay, not glacier. Let me give you another broader hint. All the quiz questions are going to be very closely connected with you.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Let me repeat the second part of the question. It said this began during the Second World War to support local businesses in a particular industry, and this involves an exchange of something.
Got it. Is it capital or venture capital or something like that?
Okay, not venture capital. I'll repeat the word again. Hola boca flu. And this is the last.
Oh. Okay, book.
Exactly.
All right. This one is like, it is like both hit wicket and stumping and caught behind all at once. Okay, got it.
So this is exchanging of books and reading. So the Icelandic people, they have this big tradition of sitting up, on 24th December and reading. All of them sit and read. So the Iceland Publishers Association actually distribute a free catalog of newly published books to every Icelandic home to enable this. And this is like this, big tradition that they have. So
it's fantastic. We should start that here. I think it's a lovely one.
Yeah. So on the third try, but you did get that right. So all right. So now coming to the next section where we wanted to cover your current role as a venture capitalist, right? So what, in your opinion, are the building blocks of an enduring and a resilient organization?
A VC organization?
For an organization that you will be funding. Yeah.
Oh, okay, got it. Yeah, so I think that some of these might sound cliched, but we have since further validated those cliches, and that we believe they're true. So I think having a sense of a missionary organization as opposed to a mercenary one is very critical. So the reason often founders will start companies is not like, oh, I want to be rich, or I want to be famous, or I want to be powerful. I mean, those are also very interesting and perhaps pleasing side effects. It's because they want to wrong something that they see in the world, or it's something that they want to solve, or some problem that they want to solve. So even if you meet founders who 10, 15, 20 years later, after making tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, are still driven and motivated, right? Not just the Jeff Bezos and the Elon Musk. Right. You will see there's a sense of mission. They're like trying to change the world in a certain way. So that is one very important thing. Are they really driven by a passion or a mission to change the world in some positive way, right? That is one thing that is very important. The other one is the ability to iterate and ability to stay current and to problem solve, right? So for example, now, even after hitting the S&P 500, which is the 500 largest companies on the Standard & Poor's index in the US, probably arguably the 500 largest global companies, you die as a company. You vanish, you disappear after 20 years. So after becoming one of the 500 largest companies in the world, you vanish into thin air, right? Like call it the erstwhile Kodak, and there are many more, right, that have lived. And the reason that happens is if you're not able to adapt and iterate and keep up with the changes, whether it's in the consumer behavior, whether it's in the market dynamics, whether it's in business models, whether it is in technology, of course, then it's difficult. So I would pick these two as sort of very interesting traits. Maybe a third one, if I had to add, is your ability to attract and retain the best people, right? Very, very, very critical. Because, for both number one and number two to be true, which is the mission, being missionary as well as constantly iterating, you need people that are really, really smart and hungry and will stay with you. So I think those are two or three that come to mind right off the top of my head.
Right. So let me unpack this a bit. The first and the second point sort of sound to me like future relevance that we personally keep talking a lot about. So are there any lessons that individuals can draw from the way startups or organizations actually look at building future relevance? Because future relevance is seen as something that organizations need to do. You need to avoid being a Kodak as a company. But what about individuals? The principle remains the same.
Absolutely. No, brilliant point. And since this is so much about books and you guys run this CTQ around that, I think human beings and professionals, if you don't constantly evolve, you are going to be, out of a job, out of a paycheck, out of whatever, right? You have to constantly evolve because even, like when I graduated 25 years ago, there was, the C programming language and the C+ programming language. Even Java wasn't born yet, right? And now if you see, what is happening, if you're a 16 or an 18-year-old today or a 38-year-old, right? And if you're not paying attention to AI or to privacy preserving data mining or machine learning, or to, some of these sort of new trends around 5G and so on, you're going to be defunct 10 years from now, right? You'll basically be jobless, right? And therefore, I think it's very, very critical, no different than a startup, for you to constantly evolve yourself, right? And to constantly get better. And books is a great way to do that. Taking risks is another good way to do that. I think talking to other smart people in diverse areas is another way to do that. And constantly challenging yourself to think a little bit beyond your status quo or your comfort zone is very, very, very critical. So I think people, and I think again related to books, I think there's a quote from Charlie Munger, who's one of the kind of legendary investors, and I'm sure he's been often cited on your podcast. So he has this thing, like, he knows zero smart people, zero smart investors, who don't read. Zero, right? And this guy is like 96 years old, and of course one of the most epic investors of all time. So I think you have to keep asking yourself, how can I evolve every day? What can I learn every day? How do I grow every day? Because if you don't, you're going to be like glacial ice.
Right. Yeah. And in fact, even when we look at the whole Clayton Christensen's, innovators DNA kind of a thing, these larger companies versus smaller company mindset, larger companies are organized and designed for success in something which they have had success in, right? Everything designed around that, but we know that you need to actually go iterate and be ready to fail. In fact, just yesterday I heard this comment from a large company that we are working with, that in our company everyone comes from these pedigreed B schools, so they are habituated for success. So if we say that you need to be ready to fail, that is something which is which is anathema to them. So how do you make that change in the mindset for the organizations then?
Yeah, I mean, there are again all kinds of books and folklore around this, right? So for example, 3M, which is a company in the offline world that makes post-its and so forth, adhesives, whatever. So they have this rule of thumb that at least 25% of their revenue every year has to come from new products, right? You set an OKR like that or a KPI like that, you're forced to kind of innovate, right? And do something. One of my popular blog posts, not necessarily about books, that went quite viral was, I believe in taking a year off every 10 years. Call it a sabbatical, call it a jobbatical, self-imposed, take a year off, go read, travel, whatever. And that makes you very uncomfortable. Right. But it helps you not only relax, but also grow a lot, because you talk to people, you explore things, etc. So I think you're right. It is a mindset, right? Because once you're successful, or once you're stuck in kind of Newton's laws of motion, like inertia, is very hard to change. So I think that you just have to kind of maybe self-motivate, maybe kind of the right kind of group you hang out with, to just try a few new things from time to time, right? It need not be about books, right? It could be about some other experiences, or downloading a new app, or a new game, or seeing a different TV show than you normally would, or a different series on a Netflix or an Amazon Video or whatever, Hotstar, right? So I think it's just exposing yourself to some differences that can help you maybe overcome a little bit of that inertia. I'm not sure, but maybe some of this is also nature. I would love to think that it's 100% nurturable, but those are a couple of thoughts.
Right. Yeah. And on the third point that you mentioned about organizations, about being able to attract great talent, a lot of that I'm sure will boil down to building a great organizational culture. So that's something which again we've seen in some of our work with these smaller companies, where especially the funded companies, right, where they are in the battle of the here and now. Which is right. I mean, they need to get the product market fit and all of that. But there is almost a deliberate deprioritization of building an organizational culture and giving that focus on the values. So is that something that as a VC, is that something that you flag to your companies, or to people who come to you for advice for, and how do you work on that people foundation bit?
Yeah, so I think, again, it's a combination of nature and nurture, right? So some founders are inherently driven to build an amazing culture and to build an amazing organization and to attract people smarter than themselves into the company and so forth. And for some others, it's a learned experience, right? They kind of evolve as they go along the way. So we spend a lot of time on org design. We spend a lot of time helping them with hiring their top talent and even being a part of the process to be perhaps a sounding board, or maybe even some cases interview talent and give them feedback to the founders and so forth. Um, we also pay a lot of attention to that before investing, right? And after investing. So we look at, for example, what are the employees saying about that company on platforms like Glassdoor or LinkedIn, or even for that matter, Twitter, when we can anecdotally look at it to say what kind of culture is there. We will do discrete ref checks, right? On asking people, how is Harish to work with, right? Or how is Ramanan to work with, or what have you, et cetera, et cetera. So the Glassdoor ratings, we track both pre and post investing. We actually occasionally, if they fall below a certain level, we send a note to the founder and kind of ask them to do like a little dipstick. We do annual kind of 360-degree reviews, and by the way, not just for the founders, we encourage them to do it for themselves. We also do it for ourselves, saying how are we as a VC partner to work with, right? And what can we do better, right? Because we meet very actively and work with them and do reviews. So I think these are a couple of things that really help. I mean, things like 360 reviews, things like Glassdoor ratings, things like an employee NPS is becoming popular for the best companies. So some of the best companies are not just doing customer NPS, the net promoter score, but they're also doing, employee NPS, saying on a scale of 0 to 10, would you recommend, working at CTQ, right? Or Prime Ventures to somebody else, right? So employee NPS is becoming, so there are many different techniques. And like I said, I would love it if everybody did it. But I would say certainly, I don't have the actual kind of factual data, but anecdotally, I feel like the best companies in the world are, magnets for hiring and retaining talent. I can't think of any company, right? You can go from China to US, right? Alibaba, Tencent, Apple, Google, Facebook, you name it, Amazon. I mean, if you can't figure this out, you're just not going to build it at scale. You could still be a successful company. You could even be a very profitable company. But until you crack this code, and you can't crack this magically, it's not some inspirational halo effect that'll come in your kind of hair or your head. It has to be something which is cultivated and constantly reinforced.
Right. So is part of this realization, like you said, some of it is learned experience. So is that a missing piece in how or before people actually jump into going and starting their own companies? Is there a missing piece here? Because not all of this can be taught in an entrepreneurship course. Most of it has to be. You have to burn your hands and then learn all of this. But is there something that somebody is doing well? If you look at countries like Israel, yes, they are the startup nation. Yes, they need to scale up now. But there are some places where this is happening better than in other places. So comments on that?
Yeah, no, I think that the question is, it's not like you're going to be born having learned everything, right? I mean, Bill Gates started when he was 19, right? Zuckerberg started whenever he was similar, 18, 19, right? So many of these things can be learned. The question is, do you have the mindset to learn, right? Do you have like a growth mindset? Are you open to input and feedback, right? Or are you, too arrogant or too cocky and too unwilling to see something else, right? That's one part of this challenge. The other part, like you said in your earlier part of your question, is that there's also a food and shelter issue as a startup, because you're saying, boss, I don't even have customers, I don't have revenue, I don't have funding. What the hell? Talk about organization design and employee NPS. Have you completely lost your mind? And that doesn't really work, does it? Right. So I think there is a little bit of that, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, saying once the food and shelter is sorted, I can think about all these beautiful concepts that I heard. And then the third is, of course, your personality. And by the way, the personality is not just to say that you would have only learned it in a job. Oftentimes, when we are looking for founder traits, people who have been very active volunteers, right? Who, were the college cultural secretary or helped organize, whatever entrepreneurship fest somewhere, or were volunteering for Akshay Patra and like did this, that, and the other, etc., etc. Right? We see all these other traits where if you're fundamentally a believer in collaborating, in recruiting people to your cause, in helping, get leverage back to Andy Grove and multiplying your cause, then those things really, really help, right? So we look for those traits, but 100% it can be nurtured, right? If you are open-minded, if you have a growth mindset, if you're willing to take some tough medicine from time to time, I think it can be nurtured.
Right. Yeah. And in your experience, have VCs changed their outlook towards what they should be adding, to the companies that they fund over the last decade or so in India as well as in the US?
Yeah, it is also an industry which is highly disruptive, right? I mean, sources of capital are changing, right? The way entrepreneurs raise capital is changing. In what way do VCs want to distinguish themselves is changing, to your question. So for example, we at Prime Ventures, we are what we call a very active investor. So we are very, very hands-on with respect to helping the founders on whatever it takes. Could be with, like I said, hiring, could be with fundraising, could be just a shoulder to cry on, could be with, helping crack a partnership with a top 5 bank in India, could be whatever, right? Some other VCs distinguish themselves through other means, right? So I definitely think the landscape not only has changed a lot in the last, like, let's say 15 years in India, which is the life of the Indian kind of modern VC industry, but even globally. One common trait I would say is that even if I look at not just India, but globally, US and so forth, is VCs are now much more open and less sort of, mystical and smoky backroom kind of cigar deals or whatever. People are, the fact that, I'm doing this kind of podcast with you, but I also have a very active, LinkedIn and Twitter page, and so do several of my other partners, and so do many other friends of ours and the other VCs who nominally we either partner or compete with, right? So people are much more transparent. Like, this is what we believe about this sector. These are the entrepreneur traits we look for. This is what we're looking for people, who are, organization builders or not, as opposed to saying, I will just meet, Harish or Ramanand, I'll just, take a scribble and say, okay, thank you. It was nice meeting you. Like,
Right.
this is what we look for, right? So it's almost like open sourcing of your thesis, open sourcing of your investment decisions. I'm on my LinkedIn page, I actually write, these are the 5 questions we go through, right? And so, hey, look, there's nothing to hide. And at least, so I think it's a lot more transparency, a lot more openness, and a lot more, because it's a competitive business, which itself can be disrupted. You're constantly saying, okay, what other value can I add to the ecosystem, to the portfolio company, to a prospective company that I might want to invest in?
Right. Yeah. Okay. So before we move to the next section, there's one more quiz question for you.
I have to put my helmet on now. Okay.
Yes. This again, this is very closely related to you. That's a big hint. So
Yes.
which publication started in 1988, started with a headline with these words: Mendota, Monster, Malls, Dash. The Latin motto of this publication is Tu stultus es, or in English it means you are dumb. So which publication, and what's the dash there? It's a Mendota, Monster, Malls, Dash. The dash starts with an M.
Mendota, Monster, Malls, Dash, and what was the other hint? Their
motto. The Latin motto is it means you are dumb.
Okay. You are dumb.
It's a publication which started in 1988. So where it started is very, very closely related to you. But later they have moved, cities, and now the publication doesn't exist as a print. I think the print edition closed back in 2013, if I'm not wrong.
Is it 1988 or 1998?
88.
88. Okay. If it was in 98, I would have been tempted to say, Motley Fool, because the Motley Fool brothers started their company, I think, in the 90s. Mendota Monster Malls. Okay, I am drawing a blank. Uh, it's a publication.
Yeah.
Okay.
And think about the motto. It means you are dumb. Okay. And I'll also tell you what the next section is. The next section is going to be about your career and work. So, your entire uh,
Got it.
student and work life.
Got it. Got it. Got it. Okay. To be honest, I am totally blanking out here. So what would I say? 1988. It's not too old either. That is the challenge. All right. Okay. No, I am sorry. I am totally blanking out. So you will, yeah, I will either have to do a pass or
yes.
or prove that you are dumb.
So the dash in Mendota Monster Malls was.
Okay. I got it. Okay. Can I late breaking news?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Is it something to do with the Wisconsin Badgers or the Wisconsin letter?
Okay, so the dash is Madison. Now you'll have to tell me the publication.
The Onion?
Yes, it is the Onion. It was a late cut, but you got it right.
Yeah. Very, 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 very late and very fine cut. Okay, got it.
So we wanted to move to the next section where we wanted to talk about how your life moved on from your days at Wisconsin Madison, and that's what we thought we'll start this with. So so Wisconsin Madison, how was your life there in terms of again reading to start with all the libraries there, especially pre-internet days, right? So how was that when suddenly you had this the doors to the world of internet and these big libraries opened for you as a book reader? What was your first reaction there?
To be very honest, I went for grad school, right, in computer science, and there wasn't a whole lot of reading outside of the curricula and writing tons of code, literally like hundreds of thousands of lines of programming code in various languages. That said, one big thing, since I grew up in, Bombay and Ahmedabad and then moved to the US, that was absolutely astounding and mesmerizing about the US kind of system was the public libraries, right? And so both, I would say in Madison, Wisconsin, I took some benefit of that, but like I said, both for the most part, I was in the department writing code or reading books or finishing assignments. But when I moved to California and even later in my life and, got married and all that stuff, I would spend hours and hours in the public library. And I thought it was the greatest public good that could ever be done, right? To make, information, knowledge, entertainment, etc., accessible to everyone for just being a citizen of that county or that state or that country, right? So that was like definitely a big thing. So less about Wisconsin per se, just phase of life perhaps, but I leveraged the public library system enormously in California, and then later on, like I said, post being married and all that. So literally as a family, we would go and pick up 8, 10, 12 books every Saturday, and then we would like just skim around and look around and all that, and it was just magical.
Right. So, talking about your stint in the US and even now in India. So you've moved across roles, starting from software engineering to product management to now being a VC. So how much of this was very deliberate, and what did you do to prepare yourself for, the next role, or, just when you knew that you're going to move to a very different kind of a role, what did you do to prepare yourself?
Yeah, so I think there isn't any explicit, like, oh, now I'm going to be a product manager, so let me prepare for it, or I'm going to be a VC, let me prepare for it. I think the process for me has been very consistent, right? Keep learning, keep evolving every day, right? There's a nice quote I have from, Mahatma Gandhi that I stumbled upon very early in my life. And I believe that, right? Live every day as if it's your last, and learn every day as if you're going to live forever. And so very rarely have I like, okay, let me prepare for a career in VC. I think I was an accidental product manager. I was an accidental venture capitalist, perhaps accidentally got into Wisconsin, etc. Right? Accidentally got into IIT. I didn't know what IIT was until almost 12th grade. And I grew up in Bombay, and like everybody was studying, and I'm like, all my friends are studying for this IIT thing. So I asked my dad. So really that I would not say is like some kind of, it's like the jobs quote, right? It's easier to connect the dots looking back than looking forward. That said, I have always been very, inquisitive and curious and, open to other ideas and talking to people. And I would always ask people like, hey, tell me something interesting, tell me something new, tell me, and not just books, I mean, just anything really, right? So that I think has helped me quite a bit with respect to preparing for new roles, right? And being open to new roles, etc. Right? So I'm less scared. I mean, I'm still vulnerable, right? You change into something you have no clue about. Just to give you an example, when I was becoming a VC, my partners offered me to come on board as a venture investor. Like, I have no investing experience. I've done some angel investing, but it's largely been ad hoc. Like, I met the founders, I like them. I'm like, okay, these are like good people to support, so let's like fund them. And they said, that's totally fine. That just works for us. But it wasn't like, oh, I spent the last 10 years preparing for how entrepreneurship is done and venture companies are done. But when I look back, right, I was helping founders of, all kinds of companies, right? Including the famous ones like the Flipkarts and the Olas and Holiday IQs and so many other companies, right? Even 197 before it was Paytm, for 10 years or 8 years before I became a VC. But I was not helping them because I wanted to become a VC. I was helping them because they were interesting people doing interesting things, and it felt good to help them. And I was also learning something along the way. I think people often get caught up in the transactionality of like, if I do this, so what? Like, what will I get out of this? Right. You have to sometimes let that go. And certainly it has worked for me. It may not work for everyone, but it has worked for me.
Right. And the move from US to India, how was that move? Were there any jittery moments then? And was there any, any moment when after you came in and you sort of wondered, why did I make that move?
Yeah, so the move was unfortunately triggered by some personal family stuff, right? So that was the trigger for the move. So it wasn't any, again, grand design. We literally, picked up the phone and said, let's just both quit our jobs and let's move back to India. Thank you very much, right? And so that was pretty quick. There were many jittery moments. My wife used to work at eBay and then IBM. I was a fairly fast rising executive at IBM. And so we both resigned our jobs, and we didn't even have resumes or a job in India. That was very jittery. Like a month after we both resigned, saying, ab kya karenge? Like, now what are we going to do? Fortunately, I got into Google and several other companies, and so did she. So I think things that were a bit jittery just after moving here, beyond all the kind of food and shelter issues and getting a job and all that, was the culture was very different, right? The professional culture. Because I'd grown up in India, I would visit often, but I had worked in the US. So US is very cut and dry, right? You come, you do your stuff, you get out, right? There is no like, just too much. I mean, there is water cooler conversation and people will go hit a bar and people will go play, some sport together. But it's, when you're at work, you're like getting stuff done. India had this whole social culture to get work done. So if I didn't come and have chai with Harish and like talk to him a few times, the C2Q podcast would not happen. And like, dude, that's his job to do the podcast. It's my job to ask him or him to ask me. So once we've agreed, it should just happen. Like, why do I have to further persuade and motivate him? And this was even in large companies and successful ones like Google's and Make My Trips, right? So I realized the power of, both the power, the boon and the bane of, right? Having relationships at work, which were much more social, not just professional, to get work done, right? And that was a big shock, because you were like, he agreed to do it or she agreed to do it. So now why am I like, it should be done now, right? Like and it's not even it's not a pulling rank or power. It's just like, so anyway, so that was one big shock. Yeah, let me just stop there if you have more questions,
Yeah. So that was, I sort of expected that answer as well. So I wanted to ask you about that. When people make that switch, a lot of people are making that switch these days, both from US to India. And the other thing is also moving from a large company to, say, starting something of their own. Sometimes people don't realize the weight that the large organization that they are working with has, right? Suddenly when they are on their own, they don't, doors are not going to open that easily. So how do people accept that change, and what do they do? You mentioned persuasion. So again, that's not something which comes naturally to people. How do people navigate through this maze? It's almost like this labyrinth that you need to work through.
Yeah, I think it's gotten better now, right? Because there's been enough osmosis, reverse osmosis, probably is there a better term here, reverse brain drain or whatever. And so therefore people have balanced out a little bit on both sides. But it is hard. And I know plenty of people that went back because they couldn't deal with the culture shock, professional culture shock, not the personal social life and all that. That is also a different ballgame, but maybe for another day. And so I think that if you are one of those listeners thinking of moving back to India, right, I would find enough people that have made this transition. Because if somebody had told me that this is what it takes, right? It takes building relationships, and organizations are very relationship driven and people driven. And, maybe I wouldn't have been so shocked, right? Because you're like, okay, yeah, that's what it is. So, I can be a fairly social person, right? I've been in, college organizing committees and cricket teams and soccer teams. So I'll like, okay, I didn't think this was a part of my job, but you're now telling me this is a part of your job. So I think talking to people helps a lot. Back in the day, there also used to be this nice forum called Return to India, R2I, which is probably defunct or maybe it's alive. I don't know now. It was like a news group, right? Like a Yahoo group kind of thing, where a lot of people would talk about these experiences. I think just talking to people helps. And I think there is a lot less impedance mismatch now, perhaps, than before. I mean, there'll still be a bit of a change, but it's not going to be as radical, perhaps, as it was before.
Right.
Oh, one more other thing I would say, and this is to your point about planning forward, if at all, right? Again, if you want to be a little bit more conservative, staying with a US company, even after making the move to India, worked really well for me. So I was with Google in Mountain View in California, and I joined Google in Bangalore.
Right.
And that actually helped a lot. So even though there were other shocks in terms of how Google Bangalore functioned differently than Mountain View, at least the parent was the same, right? So the macro environment was not very different.
Right.
If I had gone from a Google or IBM in the US kind of Silicon Valley culture to a quote unquote desi startup, I think I would have probably fled back to the US and wouldn't be here in India after 13 years.
Right. In fact, that was going to be my next question. Did that make a difference that you were with Google in India? A slightly related, question there. These days, we are also seeing that entrepreneurship is not something which is restricted to these college dropouts or people who are who have come up with an idea in their hostel rooms. But you also see these 35 plus, 40 plus, age group, people who have done solid work in a specific area. They're actually subject matter experts and are now wanting to, scratch that itch and want to do it from a position of strength. Do you see that happening? And what is your view when you talk to such people as VCs, also probably drawing some analogies with your own career arc? Do you end up relating to them better than, say, a 22-year-old from, from a college?
Yeah, I think that it's a great question. And I think there are all kinds, right? Entrepreneurship is kind of ageless, if I may say so, right? We've met 62-year-old entrepreneurs, we met 42-year-olds, and we met 22-year-olds. And they all have their own unique strengths and their own unique weaknesses, so to speak, right? Or blind spots. I actually think, and there's some statistic and some study done by the Kauffman Foundation in the US, that some of the most successful companies, the median age for the most successful founders, I believe, is 38. Okay. Some of the most successful companies that you and I know about today, since we've talked a lot about Intel was started by the founders in their early to mid 40s. Adobe was started by founders in their 40s. Not Airbnb. I think one of these other travel companies was started by somebody in their 40s, etc. So I think there is a lot of merit to founders who are sort of in the mid 30s, let's call it, right, so to speak. There are downsides also, right? Because with all that baggage comes the inability to unlearn, right? Because you always knew it happened this way. So when I came to India 12, 14 years ago, mobile internet was a disaster. Broadband internet didn't exist, etc. So now I'm like, if I'm stuck in that era, and if I used to be at a, Airtel here, or the moral equivalent of that, say 20 years ago in the US, like an AOL, how do you unlearn that, dude? AOL is dead, or, whatever, like the world has changed, right? We don't have to kind of do this, right? So that is a problem. On the flip side, young folks like the 22-year-olds, irrespective of, how you connect with them or not, they have this magical fearlessness that they demonstrate, right? Often compare it to cricket analogies. That was my last blog post as well. I mean, they have no fear, right? And so they're like, whether you can call it they're, fearless, or ignorance is bliss, or, take no prisoners. I mean, they are coming with this, the world is my oyster and I'm going to make it happen, right? So I think there are merits of kind of any and all of these things. I would say, if it's an area where domain expertise is going to be important, so let's say a regulatory kind of encumbered area, or where regulations play an important role. Say, talk about fintech, which is one of the big areas we invest in at Prime Ventures. In fintech, if you're somebody who's worked in the fintech industry with banking, with NBFCs, with regulators, with RBI, with SEBI, versus a 21-year-old who just comes and says, I'm just going to launch this and start taking deposits, and then we'll see what happens. Clearly, the former will do better than the latter. I mean, the latter will learn and catch up. It's not like it's a big deal, but that will be an advantage. Whereas in certain areas, if you're doing the next Instagram killer, if you're already spending 14 hours a day on Instagram and Snapchat and so on, you will have an unfair advantage over the 35-year-old. So I think it just to each their own.
Yeah, that's the subject matter expertise there, right? Right. Yeah. Another question that popped up in my mind when you were talking about moving from Google, within Google, right? How has the GIC landscape changed with respect to India and US, or headquarters in, say, Palo Alto and things like that? We work a lot with these GICs, and we still see that the arc is that, okay, the India Center got established for cost arbitrage to start with. Then there are people. So the India site head wants a larger political say in the organization. So they now want to have more ownership of the product. But architects are, sitting out somewhere else. People here have been hired to execute, and now they want them to suddenly change their, change their DNA and actually start coming up with product decisions. So this is a constant sort of tussle and tension that we see. So has this changed? And, do we need to do more from an India standpoint on this front?
To be honest, I'm not that plugged into that space anymore, right? So I wouldn't really have much of an idea about that. Some of the larger, sort of more well-known companies that one has seen, just to pick on Google again. So the entire, Google Pay and some of the Google FinTech initiatives, they are, I believe, being driven out of India for the globe, right? Not just for here. So I think that there'll be certain areas where inherently, right, having the India team do innovation for the global kind of world will naturally lead to that, right? But in the classic old GIC model of India being either a cost center or a talent center for acquiring talent, etc., I think that model is fundamentally broken, in my opinion, right? So either you're inherently coming up with products or technologies or innovations that are relevant to India and to the rest of the world from India right off the bat. And therefore there isn't like, give me a project to run. It's like, I'm already doing this here, right? Like, so, but I'm not very familiar with how the other companies are doing, and seems from what you're saying that challenge still continues.
Right. In fact, one thing that we've seen is people in larger companies probably feel they have a better bet of being closer to the customer if they go and work in a startup, right? Even as a product managerial role. Of course, if you are working on a product which is working for India first, then it makes a big difference, because then the market is here, the product development is here. But that is something which which is a cause of concern even now, that when we are in our experience with working with some of these GICs. So on that note, on a product management kind of a role, right? People who have had some experience of software engineering, say 5-10 years, and would want to move into a product management kind of a role, what is your recommendation to those people who want to make that next jump in their careers?
I go back to the 101, right? Be curious, right? Be engaged, take on responsibilities that other people don't want to take on. Hustle into a sales call. When a salesperson is going on a call, you are an engineer, say, I'll come along with you. Like, I'll be the guy who will put together the demo or the pre-sales demo if it's an enterprise type of situation, right? Go sit in the customer service call center and listen to customer calls, right? Go write a blog post about, where you see things going, right? Go try out a competitor's product and do comparison analysis between the two, right? There are innumerable ways by which you can start building your multifaceted product management skills and your product management muscle, and making yourself more attractive to be employed as a product manager. So I think there isn't a linear path. I would say, because if you're coming from an engineering background, you already have an unfair advantage. You know how to build product, you know how to build code, you know how to build features, right? So you're already like 80% ahead of the rest of the competition. Now you need to figure out who's the customer, how do we sell, what is marketing, right? What problems happen in the field, how do you iterate, like how do you make trade-offs, how do you make decisions on whether this comes in or that comes in, etc. So start exposing yourself to those areas. I think now there's also a lot of interesting courses that are available online on various platforms, right? I was invited by Your Story to help them launch their product management course, but there's enough on, Coursera and Udacity and just on YouTube, right?
Right.
So you can learn both by learning and by doing, but the main thing is to get out of your shell of like, I just want to sit here and write code, and try to just see where does that code show up and how does it make a difference in the life of the customer.
Right. And out here, is there also something about building that perception about what you are doing? Again, that's something which we've been working with some companies with, where that building that social capital, that I have actually done all these things, and you go and write about it. There is this thing of engineers being seen as introverts, so they may be doing a lot of stuff, but they will not go and talk about it. So they will not go blog about it. They will not start a podcast of their own. So is that also something that people should be more willing to try out?
Yeah, it would certainly be a nice to have. I would not necessarily say if you're coming from that stereotypical introverted engineer kind of sitting at the cube and writing code kind of thing, to suddenly say I have to go and do a public presentation to 50 people. You would just like drop off the face of the earth, right? And that would not be worthwhile. There are many product managers, right, who are very good communicators but may not be great public speakers, right? You can now, the magic of social media is so phenomenal. You write a 6-page white paper on something that you believe, and you send it to all your product managers, your head of sale, your GM, your CEO, whatever, your co-founder, and everybody will read that and say, who's this guy who wrote this? I want to talk to them, right? You don't have to be a public speaking presentation guru, whatever, right? But you do have to communicate, right? So that's where I would draw a line to say, you do have to get good at communication skills. Could be written, could be verbal, could be one simple trick that I recommend to a lot of engineers back when I used to mentor engineers is learn to ask questions, right? That's a very simple, still a little daunting, but learn to ask questions in semi-public forums, right? Because it builds your muscle to communicate, to think, to be vulnerable. And then over time, you will learn to communicate, in terms of the public speaking kind of a mindset. So I think learning to ask questions, learning to communicate verbally, in writing, sorry, not just verbally, can be some easy ways to potentially overcome that. And of course, if you can speak, by all means, right? All the things you said, right? Do a podcast, do a YouTube video, whatever, right? More regularly and so forth.
Right. right. And any particular books that you would recommend for this? You mentioned the courses, but any books?
For product management, unfortunately, it's very slim pickings, right? The I actually have a list of top 10 books I recommend for product managers. I'll have to dig up that list. Maybe I'll send you, it was a tweet that became quite popular, but a couple that come to mind are The Design of Everyday Things, right? By Don Norman. That's a long-term classic, timeless book. There's another one called Don't Make Me Think by Steve Krug. There's one called Inspired by Marty Kagan. He was one of the early founding product heads of eBay. That's a good one. I mean, there is quite a few more. There is Nir Eyal, right? Hooked, which of course now is potentially got into a little bit of trouble with this whole, tech causing addiction to people. But how do you make customers engaged, etc. So there is a lot of books. I will perhaps share a link with you later to share with your listeners and readers.
Yeah, we'll add that to the show notes. So, one question that popped up in my mind was also, and I remember this actually popped up when you had posted something back in April or May about, your workspace. So how did 2020 change your work routine?
It has actually been a magical experience in a positive way, right? We often talk about this, wheel of balance, right? That everybody aspires to balance in life, right? Well, I don't know about everybody, but I would say most people, right? Certainly I do. And which is to say that, look, I would love to talk to entrepreneurs, help build our portfolio companies, right? Read a lot, write a lot, talk to smart people like you, spend time with my son, my family, travel, etc. So beyond all the constraints that, unfortunately COVID brought about, I think it became a lot more about work-life flexibility, right? Not necessarily balance. I mean, there are pros and cons, and I'm sure it's a somewhat cliched point of view. Other guests may have talked about it, so for example, I'm doing this podcast with you in the middle of the day, but I have calls at night, even with founders in India. But then in between, I might go and play a game of tennis or badminton. And then I'll have 2 other entrepreneur calls and portfolio board meeting. All that is not possible in the classic kind of get up in the morning, wear your pants. I haven't practically worn pants for a year plus, right? And go to office, and then you're well, but right now I have an hour and a half gap, right? Now I can go take a stroll, get my vitamin D in the sunshine with walking barefoot in the grass in the middle of the day while taking a call, which I couldn't do earlier, right? So I think it has been a boon in many ways, which is to say this whole work-life flexibility, if not balance, ability to integrate different elements of your work life. By the way, not even work and life, like in the classic sense, even work and work, right? There are things you can now do that you couldn't, right? I mean, we run our own podcast, and it was very difficult to get guests from Delhi or Mumbai or California. Now we've had Who's Who on our show because it's hey, do you want to get on a Zoom call and record a podcast? The downside has been that it has been hard to have a on-off mode. You're kind of always on,
right?
Because of that illusion of whereas in the work life kind of classic old world routine, you would go to work whatever at 9 a.m. you come home at 6-7 p.m. and then you're okay, I'm kind of off. Maybe I'll log in later for half an hour, 45 minutes, just check email, maybe a couple of WhatsApps or instant messaging, and then I'm caught up. Right. Now I'm never really off.
Correct.
Right. And that I think over time will potentially not be a good thing.
Right. Yeah. So any rituals that you have added to, make your work routine better, optimize for something? I don't know what that something is.
Yeah, no, I mean, several things, right? So like I mentioned, I will often do, if it's just an audio call, not a video one, I will often do a lot of calls on walk and talk, right? So I will put on my AirPods, right? And I will just step down. Literally, if you and I were, this is of course a recording, but if you and I were just chatting, I would just put on the thing, go for a walk, right, have the chat, and then come back and then take the next Zoom meeting. That's one thing. Another very interesting one is I'm a big believer of sleep and high quality of sleep. And as one gets older, it becomes harder, right? And so, for example, Yoga Nidra, right? And if you don't know, you should Google it, check it out, go on YouTube, wherever on your meditation app. There's all kinds of routines. So I now try and squeeze in a 20-minute Yoga Nidra every day, which I'm shuddering to think what happens to it once I go back to work, right? Because people be like, this guy is lying in his office and napping, like what the heck? But it just recharges me. Boom, like I'm back, right? 20 minutes of yoga nidra is like 2 hours of deep sleep. And you actually don't sleep, right? I mean, it's like a sleep meditation, but you actually are awake and sort of somewhere between the conscious and the deep sleep kind of stage, right? So that is something that got added, which I have not added for 25 years of my career. And now I'm like literally thinking, how will I maintain it? So there are a couple of those kinds of routines that became much easier. I think losing the commute was obviously, especially in a city like Bangalore, was a godsend. That was a positive. By the way, the flip side of that thing was that in the commute, I used to catch up on a lot of phone calls and podcasts and audiobooks and all that. So that kind of went away for the first few weeks. And I'm like, wait, life was a little bit more interesting. Like what happened? Like that commute, 2 hours of commute went away, which I was using very productively or sometimes for intellectual stimulation. So of course I brought that back. But at least in the first month and a half of that lockdown, I kind of lost it. And I'm like, something is not right. Like I little reverse engineering to do the bug fixing.
Right. And what's the first app that you open in the morning?
I would still, unfortunately, say it would be WhatsApp/Signal. We're still a little confused because we tried to move all of our work stuff to Signal, but there's enough and more WhatsApp. So communication app is probably the first one that gets opened in the morning.
Right. And on this note of what has happened in the last 1 year, there's this big joke, right, that the chief digital transformation officer of organizations has been COVID. So do you subscribe to that? And is it in a good way? Any industries that you think have seen a fundamental change in how how they operate because of the last 1 year?
I think pretty much in every industry, right? And I think it is more so perhaps in the global markets, right? But even in India, I mean, the appetite to adopt technology has improved radically. The appetite to even pay for technology, and I'm talking, software, SaaS, enterprise, has improved dramatically. India is still pretty early in the journey of adopting technology in this so-called COVID-19 as the chief digital officer, which is a new one. But I think the mindset wise, right? I mean, people are a lot more open now, right? In all elements. So I think, the globe is going digital. I think India is going digital. I don't think there's any coming back now.
Yeah. In fact, on that note, one of the business leaders who was there on a previous CTQ Smartcast had, said that the boundaries are so blurred now that there is no concept of an India center anymore, right? Why should it be India? Because if they can hire from anywhere in the world, then what could be the drawbacks of something like this? Because you're also suddenly going to lose that cultural identity if you're going to hire everyone from, say, Southeast Asia to South Asia to maybe Eastern Europe. Does that India center then? What does it even mean?
Yeah. No, I think now, this is the Tom Friedman book, right? The world is flat. I think that that thing has also been brought to completely to life now, right? In a true sense. So it's not just about one country or one geography. So I think talent has to be both. We started the show with that, or somewhere in the middle, we talked about it, right? Talent has to be both recruited and retained anywhere now, because they are going to be anywhere. And so while earlier you might actually have had that advantage of, having some proprietary access to talent in India or the cost advantage, now everybody else has that same advantage, right? Globally. And the best talent will be hired globally and they will have to be retained globally, right? So it's no longer like, such and such left for this large multi-billion dollar or, a FANG company or whatever, because they're all looking. And on the brighter side, you as a startup entrepreneur, you can also hire talent anywhere, right? So you are also not stuck to the limitations of Pune or Bangalore, the two cities that you and I are sitting in. So for example, we would fuss a lot about startups being Bangalore based. Now we're like wondering, like, should we fuss about that, right? Because you're like, so long as they can hire talent kind of anywhere and make it work, should we care, right? Like we did more deals, more investments in Delhi last year than any time in our history. And I was just reflecting on that, like, why is that? Because we didn't have to fly to Delhi. and perhaps that's why. So yeah, so I think talent is going to be global. I think you can acquire talent anywhere, and you have to manage them from anywhere. Uh, that's all that said, I think it's also difficult to make it work. We will see once all this goes away and the physical office or some sort of hybrid office scenario resumes, as to how this kind of pans out culturally. Like, what does it? Because to build an organization and culture and camaraderie and all that takes some amount of time and engagement and face to face and all that. So it remains to be seen, kind of how that will be, and will we go back to that center of gravity of all the talent in one place all the time, 5-6 days a week, 12 hours a day kind of mindset, or are people able to manage it? Because again, like the org competency, it is some people have it and some organizations will have that inherently, and some won't, and they will need a physical face-to-face setup to foster that.
Correct. Yeah. So the levers to influence people have changed for sure, and I think they will need to be harnessed better by these organizations. Yeah. So before we move to the last section, the final quiz question. Again, this is something which actually you've sort of referred to, through the course of this interview. So allogotransiphobia is the fear of being caught in public transport without what?
Without your smartphone or your technology device?
Not okay. What technology device?
Say that again.
Allogotransiphobia is the fear of being caught in public transport without what? And it can be a device. It can be anything else as well.
Okay, got it. Is it like your sanitation mask?
Okay, not sanitation mask.
Not in that direction.
Not COVID.
Okay, got it. Okay, in a public transportation setup. So your so you said not smartphone, maybe your headsets?
Yeah, it could be a smartphone as well.
Okay.
This has been around, this word. I think it's one of those made up words where they've come up with these phobias. But you can actually break it down. So transiphobia is the transport and phobia bit. A logo is what you need to
focus on. Got it. A logo, transiphobia. All right. Logo, transiphobia. I'm sort of drawing a bit of a blank. Okay. You'll have to help me out here again.
So this is something which I have a sneaky feeling that you do suffer from.
Okay.
Based on what you said, was a major change for you when COVID hit. So that was a major change for you, like you mentioned.
Okay. Is it being disconnected from kind of social media and content, podcasts,
content,
audio?
So basically, without anything to read. So
without anything to
so this is a fear
got
of having the time at disposal but nothing to read.
Interesting. No, that I definitely suffer from it.
Yes,
for sure. For sure.
Yeah. All right. So you got all three questions.
This is like your worst performing kind of guest ever. They're like, should we run this thing or Smartcast or not? No, but no. Thank you for all the hints. I think I lived the Onion motto. You are dumb. So all right, I'll live with that for the rest of the day.
Yeah. So we'll finally end this interview with this section where we ask you for your hot take. It may sound like a rapid fire, but you can take your time to give your thoughts on what is the future relevance of whatever we are asking about, right? So the first thing that I want to ask you about is, what do you think is the future relevance of non-fiction books?
I think they're extremely relevant. In fact, if anything, I'm unfortunately over-indexed on the non-fiction category, right? And I think that they will continue to be, like I said earlier, right? I mean, a book is often some, years of somebody's thinking and probably decades of their experience encapsulated into one, right? And as this knowledge explosion continues to happen, as algorithms and computers keep making things easier, I think that experiential learning that people have lived through will be very, very relevant. So I think they're here to stay.
Right. Okay. And what is the future relevance of social media?
Again, I think the world is sort of becoming and has already become more and more and more open. So I think the formats may change, right? So we may go from, like the moral equivalent of the Kindle and, so forth, to a blogs, to a, short form post, to a Clubhouse, to whatever. But this notion of an open, collaborative, transparent kind of a professional force, right? Human force, I think that is here to stay forever, right? And this is like this is like the second renaissance after the printing press, right? Like this is not going to go away for, I'm tempted to say centuries, if not millennia, right? Like it's going to be here for a long time.
Okay.
The formats will change, perhaps, right? Like Facebook might become something else, and something else might become something else.
Yeah. Okay. Traditional centers of entrepreneurship like Silicon Valley or Bangalore, what is the future relevance of that? Like you mentioned, just now. So,
yeah, I think a lot more innovation from lots of other parts of the world. It was always happening. I think that will get accelerated now, and part of it is thanks to this whole COVID episode. But the other part of it is also that I think now the world has just gone through this massive experiment of how to make things work in remote environments, right? And so now I think this belief that you can't do a great company from Kochi or Dallas, Texas, or whatever, Eugene, Spokane, in Washington or Oregon is somewhat irrelevant, right? Because yeah, sure you can, right? I mean, assuming that you're doing the right things and are able to get the right talent. So that said, I don't think that the importance of Bangalore and Silicon Valley and all that will diminish to kind of zero. I think it'll just come down a notch. So I think for certain kinds of companies, for certain kinds of entrepreneurs, for certain kinds of innovation, I think there will be newer and more diversified cities and hubs and centers of kind of excellence that will come about.
Right. Okay. And the future relevance of product management.
I think it's more important than ever, right? Again, perhaps I'm a little biased, having spent many years there, because product management are fundamentally about how to solve customer problems, how to solve business problems, consumer problems, right? How to identify and solve them with a jack of all kind of skill set, right? Like the Swiss Army knife. So I think the role is going to become extremely important. Again, the tools that you use and the manifestation may become different, right? So it may not be about writing a PRD or a BRD. It already is somewhat irrelevant today. But the notion of what to build, what not to build, how to get it out into the market, how to see is it working or not, how to collaborate not just with human beings tomorrow with computers, as a lot more AI is in the real world. You will need somebody to champion that cause. And I think product managers are best positioned, at least in a functional sense, compared to any of the other classical functions like engineering or marketing or sales or HR and so forth.
Right. Okay. And the last one, I'm actually changing this from what I had prepared based on what I've heard, and I can't help asking you this: what would be the future relevance of Bhagavad Gita?
Yeah, I think it is timeless, right? I mean, eventually, all this is fine and dandy, but it is back to your Senti books question. Anything that is timeless, that is the only reason you can read it again and again. And by the way, it is not just that, right? For somebody, it might be the Quran. For somebody, it might be the Bible. For somebody, it might be Danny Kahneman's book. Somebody might be searching for meaning, because we, as a human race, are fundamentally driven by motivation, by purpose, by why are we here? What are we here to do? Right? Who are we here to serve? Right? What is the meaning of life? I mean, these questions do happen, and these are eternal, timeless questions. These questions will be relevant 1,000 years from now, right? I don't know if social media will be relevant 1,000 years from now. I suspect it might be, but hey, who knows? Printing press, people thought might have been relevant for 20,000 years, but now everything is digital. But it did last 600 years, right? But I think the Bhagavad Gita and some of these more kind of spiritual texts, if I may, are going to be relevant 1,000 years from now.
Yeah. So on that note, thanks a lot, Amit. It was fantastic.